Okay, I think we'll get started. I'm sure there's a few people that are going to log in the next couple of minutes, but we'll get some of the introductions out of the way. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar series during this COVID-19 period. As some of you already know, we are offering these webinars weekly on topics which are selected to help build awareness, specifically on improvement methodologies and tools that we have used in the past. So today's topic is on value-based improvement, and it's being presented by Asim Khan. Asim is a founding member and senior partner at Analyze and Improve. He has over 15 years of experience in the mining and petroleum industry. He has led many operational excellence initiatives as well as technical projects, specializing in process improvement and performance management. He has a PhD in mine ops research and is a Lean Six Sigma black belt. So on today's topic, he has successfully applied these value-based improvement techniques that you will see across many operations and businesses globally. And before I hand this over back to him, a little bit on the structure for some of you who are new to these webinars. We will start with a pre-recorded video presentation on the topic. And so while the presentation is running, you can ask any questions that you may have in the question tab, which you should see on the right-hand side of your screen. And we will keep an eye on the questions during the presentation, but the idea is to answer them at the very end. We will also have an opportunity to talk face-to-face and discuss further questions or perhaps comments or interesting points that you may have through a Google Meet session after the webinar. And the link has been added into the chat window, which you can scroll up and see, so you can attend that way. And I will be repeating this at the end of the video as well. So without further ado, let me hand this back over to Asim.
Thanks, Kerman. Before I start on the topic, for those of you who have been regularly attending, we started with a video, which gives you a bit on the awareness on the topic, and then we try to cover everything in 15 minutes. For this one, I went a little bit different. I added a bit on understanding the topic too, so you're going to see more examples discussed every time we introduce a term or a philosophy. There's also an example given for different work environments, which might be there. And so video is a little bit longer today, but I'll get the video started, and as Carmen said, at the end we'll go through the questions that you may have. Enjoy the video. Hi, I'm Asim Khan, and welcome to Analyze and Improve learning module on understanding value of your work. In this talk, we'll walk through three types of activities, which are what consumes the time value of your work. Then we'll walk through the value-based improvement. Spend a little bit more time on lean waste, because that is the most interesting part when you're trying to understand where to add value. Day in life of study tool. This is a tool that Analyze and Improve uses to not only identify type of activities, but quantify where the biggest gains might be. And we'll conclude the presentation with when to use this tool and when not to use it. Okay, so let's talk about the type of activities which add value of time in any work environment. There are value-added, non-value-added, and waste. Value-added is basically any activity which converts the resources directly into a product the customer would buy. Or it could enhance the fit, form, or function of a product or service. Also, it could be identified as something the customer is willing to pay for. If I was to take an example in an operational environment, it would be converting of any activity which converts the raw materials or resources into a refined product that the customer will buy. So let's take a mining example. You have to drill, blast, muck, hoist or haul, then crush it, grind it, separate the minerals, and then finally either smelt or refine the product. before the customer buys or gets the most value out of it. In a office environment, if we took a look at accounting people and they're creating either financial reports or filing taxes, they also have value-added steps. So in creating a financial report, they have to gather the data or transaction information, they have to analyze it, they have to record or post them into a ledger, and then eventually have to create a financial statement at a given time period. So those are some examples of the value-added activities based on their work environment. The next one is the non-value-added. Basically, these are the activities which consumes resources but does not directly contribute to a product. In this case, however, they are necessary given the work environment we have. They're necessary, but they're not really adding value, so we should be minimizing as much of these activities as possible. The examples in the operational environment is, you have to service and maintain your equipment. You have to do safety inspections or safety initiatives. You have to do planning, lining up, getting ready for work. All those are good examples of non-value-added but necessary stuff. In accounting terms, could be the same thing. You still have to plan. You still have to do multiple versions of the ledger over time before the financial statement is issued. Those could be the non-value-added time in that work environment. Finally, we have waste. This is very similar to non-value-added in the sense that it does also consume resources and not contributes to the product. However, where it's different from non-value-added, that it is usually absolutely unnecessary and should be eliminated for that reason. The common waste that everybody has in their environment, work environment, would be waiting for something, waiting for information, or in operational environment, waiting for supplies. Defects is another good example. You have to produce something which is defective, which is a complete waste of time and resources. When you create a report, if you made errors, you have to go correct them, so you just wasted some time. So those are some good examples of waste in the work environment. Now that we understand the three terms, let's talk about the value-based improvement. To understand the value-based improvement, let's look at the diagram here. And if we look at the two blue dotted lines, they basically represent your work environment, or your start and end of your work day or work shift. So if I was to look at any given work environment and their start and end, what I would see in typical company or any typical work scenario is the top one here, where I would have some activities which add direct value, or the value-added activities. And then there are some activities which are non-value-added or waste. When you're doing value-based improvement, it's important to get that picture up front, because you want to know where we are today and where we're starting. If we didn't have that picture, traditionally, what the improvement looks like is this middle scenario. Because we don't have the understanding of the value-based improvement or understanding of value-added, non-value-added, and waste, what we usually focus on is the value-added activities, because that's what the focus goes on, is what creates the product. So if somehow I can reduce the time it takes to do these activities, or in turn reduce the cycle time, I can get more done in less time. So basically what you're doing is taking all these value-added work which is being done and cramming it into space. So what this does, you're working faster, you're adding value, and yes, you're getting some more time in the end. It's not as much, but you're getting some more time where you can add more value-added work. The value-based improvement basically says you should use a Kaizen waste reduction approach. In that case, you would first try to understand where your value-added, non-value-added, and waste is, and then the focus should be on non-value-added and waste activities. And what you're trying to do there is to remove or minimize as much of as non-value-added activities we can, but reduce the wasted efforts as much as we can altogether. because this will not only get you a time, a big chunk here where you can add a lot more value-added activities, but also in turn reduce the frustration across people, improve morale, and overall deliver a lot more value. A bit more on the waste, because this is where the biggest gain is going to come from. The very commonly known 7 deadly lean waste are transportation, inventory, access motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. The acronym that you may have heard of, or the one easy one to remember, is TIMWOOD, which basically captures all the 7 as the initial letters. Some of these wastes are easy to see, or they're definitely present in pretty much every work environment. There will be transportation, inventory, defects even, or waiting for sure. Some of these are safety, morale, or image related, like access motion and defects. And some of these are hard to identify, or are embedded within your system to overcome some of the other ways, like overprocessing and overproduction. Let's get into detail of each one of these to understand them a little bit better. So let's start with transportation. Transportation is basically any movement of material multiple times before it is consumed or utilized. Usually results from poorly planned storages between material receiving and consumption. So what does that mean? If you have multiple storage or touch points, from the time the material is received to the time it's consumed, you're adding a lot more transportation by design. Instead, if you had an ideal situation where you received the product and you consumed it, and there was no storage. Obviously, the ideal situation usually is hard to maintain unless you have a really efficient process. So you're going to have some storages in place, but the least amount of storages we can put in, least amount of transportation waste it would be. The second piece about the storages is the closest the supplies or the materials are being stored to where they're going to consumed will amount to the least amount of transportation waste, and also reduce the waste of inventory and waiting, which is prevalent with transportation kind of waste. It could also lead to the waste of overproduction and overprocessing, because if your storages are not in good place and you have a lot of transportation waste, the tendency will be to use those supplies and materials when you got them to workplace, even though you may have finished what you needed to do for the day. So you're going to overproduce, or in some case, you can't really overproduce, but you overprocess it. So you use more supplies than needed, so you don't have to take them back. Inventory, I think it's the easy one to see in each work environment. Basically, it's not having the right material or having too much. Common type of waste, as I said, generally present at any operation. The one piece which people miss is any unfinished good or material, even if it's not being stored in a storage, it is a type of inventory waste. And the one that most people miss is not having enough material where it is required is also a type of inventory waste. It's not just about having too much, because that's the easiest to see, but it's also about when you need it, it's not there, it's the inventory waste. Motion. It's the unnecessary movement, like stretching or exerting oneself to do a job, looking for items to do a job. That's that kind of waste. It's similar to transportation, but it's about people or equipment moving at the workplace when they're trying to do a job. Operationally speaking, I'll go back to mining examples. So when a scoop is trying to get a bucket from a stope and loading a truck, motion waste may look like that he has to move into the stope multiple times to get to the ideal position of getting a bucket, and then has to come in and get into a position before a truck comes in, truck gets to the loading spot, and then scoop moves again to dump that bucket into the truck. All that is extra motion that can be avoided, and it's a waste. Similarly, when a miner is getting out of a scoop to get bucket samples multiple times, or a driller is getting down to get samples from his cuttings, if they're doing it excessively and not just what is required, it could be a form of waste. In operational environment, if you're waiting, like if you're creating a report and you go to a print room to print the report, you have to load the papers, which are stored in somewhere else in storage. So you have to go to storage to get those papers, get the report printed, then go to the other side of the room to punch them and coil the report, and then finally store it into a different storage. There's a lot of movement which is happening, and that will be type of motion waste in that environment. A good tool to use to capture and understand the magnitude of this waste is something called spaghetti diagram. So all that you're doing is tracking on a paper or sketching on a paper the movement from place to place as you're doing your work in sequential steps. And then look at it. Does it look like a spaghetti, or does it look like the best way to do that job and minimize the movement? Waiting, slowdowns, shutdowns of work due to unavailable material, machinery, manpower, directions. It could be a lot of things. As long as you're waiting, it's a form of waste. It's the most prevalent type of waste. Most people would connect with this. Some examples include waiting for previous operations to finish, so you can go in and actually do your job. Waiting for another process to input, so you are at your workplace, but you're missing something which is being consumed by somebody else. Waiting for someone to confirm if quality of finished job is good. So you finished your job, or you created a product, and now you have to wait until somebody says, yeah, this is good enough, and then you can move on. Finally, waiting to know where the next job is. So you don't have the directions up front, you don't have the plan. All that leads to waiting waste. Overproduction is about more than what is needed or before it is needed. This is the most damaging type of waste because usually it's embedded into the process to avoid shortcomings of other processes. What do I mean is we know that we're not efficient, and we will have times when we are going to run out of supplies, or when we're doing something in one place and we can't go to the other place because the other place is being consumed by somebody else. Then we'll keep working or overproducing in one area, or keep consuming supplies in an area because now I have them and I know I'm not going to have them later, so I'll just overproduce now. Which this leads to the waste of inventory, waiting, transportation, a lot of other waste which could happen because of overproduction. Overprocessing is about having an overcomplicated process, or more or higher quality work being produced than required by the customer. Again, it's usually done to overcome the defects in a process in form of multiple steps or inspections. So because our product or process or work environment is not up to par, we know we can create some defective products, and we might add extra steps to make sure throughout the process that what we're producing is good enough, right? So we're doing inspections, we're doing extra steps that which are not required. Poor pre-planning or not working or not knowing of what is the future plan would result in overprocessing. This is always the case when we have poor pre-planning. So if you don't know the bigger picture, or you don't know where you're going in a month, 2 months from now, or in some cases even within the week, you will start working on something and then realize that the plan has changed. So you have to go somewhere else, leave the work unfinished, or leave, or even have a job done which is no longer needed. So you've just overprocessed. A product exceeding customer specification is a sign of overprocessing. So this is, you are creating something which customer didn't ask for. It's a better, you put a lot more effort into it to make it different because you think this is good, but the customer is not paying you for that good, then that is a sign of overprocessing. Defects, rework. Anytime you have to do something is part of a defect. Scraps due to defects or incorrect information also is a form of defects waste. Any delays in production of final product is also formed this way. So what does that mean is you have created a product and it is according to the design specs of the customer, so you can sell it, but it wasn't created in time, the delivery time expected, then it's still a form of defect, because you're going to end up losing something because of it. Gets very expensive as a product moves down the production flow before getting scrapped. Obviously, the more effort and time you put into place, excuse me, the before you catch it, the more time and effort you put into it, obviously, is a lot more expensive. A way to remove this waste is to establish a customer-supplier relationship between internal operations and to only move the product if the customer specs are met. The important point to remember here is what I'm suggesting is not adding inspection steps, as we talked about in the overprocessing. What we're talking about is developing an understanding of what the next process requires, and then having a process which delivers that without the inspection. That's what you need to remove the defects. There is an eighth type of waste, which has become popular over time. It's the waste of non-utilized talents or skills of workers. It was made famous in the Toyota production days. Total production system days. It occurs when organizations separate the role of management from the employees, resulting in frontline workers to not be part of the planning. Really what this does is it discourages the employees, as they feel they're just expected to follow orders. And you're actually really missing opportunities, because frontline workers who are the one who knows the problems firsthand and usually also know what the solutions are to overcome those shortcomings. The result of this kind of waste is the attitude in a work environment that I'm not here to think, I'm here to work. Really, what this leads to is a moral issue of neither considering nor applying suggestions, and obviously valuing correction of errors rather than prevention, because the attitude of, I'm just going to follow orders. Let's finally talk about this day in life of study tool that analyzes and improves uses to identify and quantify the magnitude of problems. What this is, it's a minute-by-minute review of each and every activity performed by an individual, by a work stream, but also any observations, communications, or other data which is collected during that study goes into identifying and quantifying the three activities, value-added, non-value-added, and waste. Some of the things to remember, this is really, you're trying to spend time observing a person in non-threatening manner. You can't show up and start recording without any communication. You have to make sure the person knows what you're doing, and you're there to understand, not to direct how to work. Need breakdown of activities into value-added, non-value-added, and waste. Obviously, that's why we're doing this. Other outcome of this tool usually is a distinction between what we observe versus what the people who work there believe their shortcomings are, and versus what they wish they had their process running as. We'll see some examples of this in later slides. Here's some of the categories we have used when we're doing day in life of studies. Basically, anything which is a planned assigned task or what they're planned to do for the day, falls under core work. Anything which is communication related, like meetings, planned meetings, or daily supervisor visits, daily technical people visits to the workplace for having either planning conversation or safety conversations or necessary conversations goes in a formal communication category. Anything where they have to troubleshoot or fix problems will go under that solving problems category. When they're away from the workplace for any reason, like breaks, lunch, they're going to get supplies, they're traveling to the next workplace, will fall under the other category. anything which they did not know about and they have to do, like it wasn't a planned work, but they got there and found out they actually have to do another task, falls under reactive. And finally, anything else which is non-valuated type or waste will capture it in the non-valuated and waste. Important thing to remember here, these are not written in stone. You can have your own categories which help you in the end translate what you captured to value-added, non-value-added, and waste. That's really what you're trying to do. So in our case, definitely all the core work is going to value-added. Some of the problem solving, some of the waste stuff will go to non-value-added with necessary, same as communication, but other stuff will go to waste. So you have to kind of get that picture up front and know what you're trying to capture. It will make your life easier. So let's look at some of the examples. Here's a output of a DILO or day in life of study for a truck operator. And we've got 3 bars underneath: observed, thinks, and wishes. So what we are trying to do when we look at thinks and wishes is try to understand what is the current understanding of where the time is being spent. How much is the value added, they believe, how much time they're spending on non-value but necessary stuff, and how much time they're spending on waste. If there is a big difference between value added, between think and wish, then you know that they have a picture and how much of that picture they want to change or where they want to change. The observe then shows us, if there are things which are not seen or not understood or overlooked currently, because any gap between observe and think would basically show that. That's the advantage of doing a DILO chart. So in this example, you can see the observed value at a time is much less than what they believe, and the non-value at a time is a bit bigger, so it's a waste. And really, when you dig into it, what we found is there's traffic on the route, fueling and parking, which adds almost 37% of the time in day for the truck operator. And so the focus should be there to see how can we minimize that time or eliminate it altogether. I mean, if we had designated parkings for the trucks, so you may actually have no time being wasted looking for parking or looking for equipment. Similarly, there's another one here for a drill operator in an underground mine. You can see there is, again, some difference between observed and think. In this case, a chunk of time is being spent on setup and moves of drills during the day. 28% of the time. Again, an opportunity exists here to standardize the setup of all drills with all drill operators to minimize the time, and also minimize the number of moves that you need to do to deliver the drill pattern. An example of shift mechanic, as you can see by talking to them firsthand and knowing what they think the process is, they do know that a big chunk of the time is going to be spent on non-value-added work, and they would like to remove some of that to add more value-added time. But when we observed it, what we saw is actually there's a big chunk of pieces on waste which they have not seen before. So what did that look like? It was the excessive traveling to equipment and shop due to poor understanding of what fix is required, what gear is required, what materials is required. It was almost more than 50% of the time. And if it was just the traveling to equipment and shop back and forth to do different jobs, that would actually still fall under non-value added but necessary stuff. But because they don't understand what fix needs to be done when they get there, and then they have to travel back to get the gear and material to get that fix, that's really is a waste. It's the indication of poor planning and poor understanding. Looking at an example of a planner sitting in an office. So you've got the think basically shows here that they believe most of the time is being spent doing the value-added activities, and they will wish to even increase that a little bit more. And when the DILO was done, as you can see, the value-added time is actually quite low compared to what they believe it is, and there's a lot of non-value-added necessary and waste stuff in there. So the examples we saw here is as the planner is starting to work, people are dropping in quite frequently and asking to do things which are not part of its core work or planned work. So what does that mean? They're either bypassing its system to do the planning and just coming straight to the guy and asking him to change the plan or asking him to do something for them. That alone is 3 drops in per hour alone is taking about 17 minutes of time, just drops in. What happens after that is the person then has to focus back. So sometimes if he's documenting that information, then going for a coffee or going for fresh air, and then getting his thoughts back together and starting work. So there's some time lost in that because of it. And not only that, there's also time where now he's working on stuff which wasn't planned. So that becomes waste. Because you're actually going against what you want to do. Another example here is again an office one, a receptionist in an office. Thinks and wish looks like there's a big chunk on value added. They would like to increase that value added and remove some of the non-value added necessary time. Observed was quite the opposite. So there's a lot of waste embedded in that role. But majority of waste is coming due to the constraint which is there for physical presence at the desk. And more importantly, is the perceived inability to do other valuable tasks while at desk or away from desk. So what the agreement here was that there are some works that can be done, which makes that being at desk value added. So you can do a lot more work while at desk. And we can minimize the risk or minimize the non-value-added time being spent when she's away from desk by putting in solutions and measures in place where she can react quickly if she needs to be at work, at desk. So that was my last example. Let's conclude this talk by going through a few of the when to use this tool and when not to use it. So at the very beginning, when doing an assessment. So you're about to do some improvement, you want to understand where you need to do the improvement, where you are today, great tool to use, because it will give you a very good understanding of how much is value added, how much is non-value added necessary, and really how much is waste, where you should start focusing first. Once you've done the improvement, occasionally to see progress and validate work, yes, as you can see with the think and wish, after the improvement, your think should be very close to observed. But over time, it may slip. New waste may come through. So you want to get a picture periodically to see where you are. Some of the cautious things, people must understand why you're using it. We talked about it earlier. Do not use if the operators are apprehensive and concerned that this will lead to them being measured or disciplined. Then you will lose the value out of this tool because you won't get the information you need. You need to make sure it's communicated properly, people understand it, that it's there to remove frustrations from their work. Finally, should not be used as a cycle time measurement. It is about understanding value of time spent working. That is very true. By design, it does measure cycle times because you're measuring the value at a time, but that's not the intention here. Intention is to understand where the waste and non-value added is, because that's where the biggest bang is. So you should be focusing on that. That finishes the today's presentation. Thank you for joining Analyze Improve Learning module. Hopefully that was an informative presentation for you guys. I see a question is there on the non-value added but necessary sometimes or difficult to identify. What is your suggestion to reduce the waste? Okay, yes, I understand. So there are multiple facets to that question. The non-value added but necessary by design is stuff that you must do either, because you need to do things safely, efficiently. It makes sense, you can't just teleport things around. They can't be just done. You have to do other things in process. So the first thing I would recommend is you need to identify what are those activities. So best thing to do is maybe map the process from start to the end, right? Like what is a work look like? And if you can identify each activity, which is the non-value added and value added, and then try to understand what is the acceptable range or acceptable time, like min-max, that should be there for that non-value added activity. Because once you have that information out there, just like doing in a DILO, you will understand, if you're going beyond it, then now starting to get into the waste side of things. It's no longer just non-value added but necessary, but you're starting to add waste, and that's where you would focus. I've also seen sometimes where they're big, but they're big by design, because that's the way we can do a job, right? So I'll give you an example. It's a mining example. When you're an underground mine and you're trying to clear gas clearance after a blast, right? Let's say you have after a shift has blasted and the new shift is coming on, they're going to have to come and clear the mine, and the gases have to be cleared. So yes, that has to be done before you can start safely producing. But if it takes a lot of time, it may start turn into a waste activity. And if it happens over and over, like beyond the expected time it should take to clear, then you have to now start looking into, is there a way we can make that process more efficient by adding standardization, removing some of the unplanned or misunderstood activities. And on the other side, obviously, the gases are cleared by the explosives, the reaction with the ore, the amount of material we're using. So you can also look into that and say, can we play with that to make sure the gas creation is less? Or the third piece is the ventilation. Or can we have better ventilation system, like ventilation on demand, or have things come on and off during and after the blast to clear the gases fast. So all that kind of links to based on what the problem is. So when we start looking at non-value added but necessary, that's what you have to keep in mind. You need to know what is acceptable. And if it's starting to become not acceptable, then you're moving towards waste, and now you have to solve it. Sometimes you may have a process which has been non-value added but necessary for a long time, and all of a sudden you are doing things differently where that step is no longer needed, and now it's a waste if you keep doing it. So it's some of the pointers I would suggest for that question.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the answer, Austin. While we give people a chance to list their questions or any of their comments, there is something I thought maybe you could try and comment on. You kind of touched on it a little bit on your first answer.
Okay.
And the question is there a specific waste, like in your experience, whether it's manufacturing or mining, it doesn't really matter, but is there a specific waste that you tend to focus on first when you're trying to reduce them, something that is always a go-to first hitter, so to speak?
Yeah, I think obviously the common ones, right? The waiting, inventory, transportation. I always look at those first because they're usually cause a lot of frustration in the people who are working, right? You can if you start asking them, you start talking to them, those are the ones which will come up first. Will hate to wait, right? They want to go in and start working. And that's the one which comes up first. However, when I am also looking at the overproduction and overprocessing a lot more, because to me that's the one which is people either miss because it's not easy to understand, but there's a lot more there. Right? If you have overproduction and overprocessing in your system, it causes a lot more waste than everything else. So you have to understand why is it happening. In some cases, and again, I'm going to go back to mining because it's a very good example. It's by design. Like, when you're mucking or you're moving ore, you actually have multiple handling spots. By design, you remuck, you move it to a truck, which goes to maybe an ore pass, or, it goes to a separate storage before it gets consumed by crusher to the hoist, whatever. There's a lot of touch points by design. And if that's the case, and it's taking too much time or too much wasted effort, then you have to take a step back and say, is there a better way to do this? Is there a better way to muck that ore?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
see, is
Okay.
it in the chat?
While we're waiting to see if people have any additional questions, I will share a few reminders. So we are now archiving these webinars on our website. So this is especially interesting if you want to go back and catch one that you perhaps were not able to attend live. And we already mentioned that we do have a few poll questions. We'd appreciate any feedback you may have on those questions. It takes 5 seconds, and we'll get some of your well, not comments, but some of your feedback as to what, for instance, what topics you'd like to see in the future, given by us. And yeah, I think I'll keep going just in case there is any more questions. So look, next week's webinar, same time, same place type of thing, is will be on open space technology. Some of you already have heard of this before, but it's essentially a collaborative approach designed for especially complex topics and large groups. So we'll be doing a brief webinar on that topic as well. And here's some chats going on. Anything interesting? No, just thank yous. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your participating. As last time, for those of you who wish to further discuss this topic and have a little bit of a chat session, there is a Google link that is at the high part of the chat window, but I'll copy it back in a second so that you see it again. And awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to add before I wrap up?
No, I think I just want to thank everybody to attend, and obviously we'll keep doing this weekly and add more topics.
Very good. Thank you once again, everyone. Thank you for taking the time and joining us, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Sorry, I just saw a question which popped up here. And I think the person is gone who asked the question, but I'll answer it anyways. Have you found that clients disagree with you on the activities are classified as waste and which are classed as non-value added? Yes, that does happen. It is it's sometimes, especially when you're calling them non-value-added and necessary, people may take offense because whatever they do is deemed value-added. Especially some of the activities are designed for health and safety, and what's important here is to get to the point of saying that you have to identify it as an activity upfront, be it non-value-added, be it value-added or waste. But once you've got it, it's really understanding is are we happy with it, or do we find an opportunity to improve? So if we find an opportunity to improve, then you need to do you need to either reduce it or eliminate it altogether. That's where the waste and non-value-added kind of helps. But the essence of this is, are we happy with the way we're doing things, or can we change? Hopefully that helps. Thanks again.